Apparently.
Rightio.
Well, hi, everybody, and we're here to hear more stories about the Methow. That I interviewed a lot of people back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s for the Methow Valley News and the Wenatchee World. And very nicely, the last couple of years, these are all recorded on the KTRT, the local radio station. So there are 168 recorded stories on the local radio station, and they are played haphazardly. Every day they're played once or twice a day. So, and that's fun. That's fun for, I don't hear them, but that's okay. All right, so I am going to share a screen here. And so this is the Tenderfoot Emporium in Winthrop, Washington, which many of you may recognize. And I wrote this story for the Wenatchee World on February 2nd, 1990. So we're talking 32 years ago. It's called Filling Up at the Tenderfoot. Dateline, Winthrop. It's a gray midwinter morning that hasn't quite revved into high gear. A few regulars are hunched over their 10-cent cups of coffee at the counter of the Tenderfoot store, chewing on timeless subjects such as how many deer they've seen at their place that morning, the fate of businesses in winter in a dead-end valley, or the latest scuttlebutt involving ski hill proponents and detractors. The radio turned to a local station, which is over an Omak across the Loop Loop Pass, plays on a shelf over the coffee pots, providing a background drone that once in a while catches the attention of the clientele when the Methow Valley is mentioned, or if a plug for a local business airs. These winter days are the days when Winthrop, population 400 or so, reverts to the locals. A sign tacked to the wall in front of the coffee drinkers proclaims, "Smoking is permitted throughout this establishment." Another sign says, "Rule number 1, the boss is always right. Rule number 2, if the boss is wrong, see rule number 1. The boss in this case is Gene Walker, the man down at the end of the counter working on his books. An impressive passel of keys hangs from his belt. 7 years ago, Walker leased a part of the store and little by little took over the rest of it, adding more and more items. Besides coffee for a dime, the general store offers groceries, hardware, art supplies, fishing gear, clothes, newspapers, aspirin, and ice cream cones. In a brilliant renovation move, Walker shifted the counter to where it is today, smack dab in front of 30 feet of bay window, with the best grandstand view of the town's main intersection. So the counter's right in there. You sort of see part of it. Anyone who sits there long enough over coffee can get a pretty straight scoop on what people are doing with whom that day, either by keeping their ears unplugged or their eyes outside, or both. Walker's 10-cent coffee has become a hallmark, and he sees no reason to jack up the price. "I still make 5 cents on the cup. We don't make it all that strong," he confesses, "but it's drinkable." Visitors are always shocked when we charge them 10 cents for their coffee. Often they'll come back with 3 or 4 friends. The guy who's been in before will offer to buy everyone else's coffee, and his friends think he's great till he gets the bill. From the other side of the street, an intrepid winter tourist focuses his camera on the store, one of the more handsome edifices in this town of Western motifs. A man makes a pass through the store and after buying a newspaper, stops behind a friend who's attached to his coffee cup. He waits for a pause in the conversation regarding who had the coldest temperature that morning and says, someone told me Dick, not his real name, ran his hand through his snowblower and knocked the ends of his fingers off. And then he's out the door. During a slack moment, T.R. Areola, a partner in the business, takes the styrofoam birthday cake out of the window display and flicks off the black plastic letters. He looks on the calendar, sees whose birthday it is that week, and stabs the right letters into the plastic frosting. I think you can see it, right? Yeah, you can look at the white arrow. Attention is diverted from this riveting performance by a passing car, its chained back wheels clanking. One of the regulars in the know says the driver has to use chains most of the winter because he's got quite a driveway. Everyone nods sympathetically. Outside the window, some people are and some people aren't obeying the stop signs. According to Walker, state people came and planted 4 stop signs at the intersection where there used to be only 2 yield signs. That was in October of 1988. Walker said the locals ran the signs on the main street for months because not only were they not used to them, but they were too high to see. I've been here for 12 years and there are more close calls now with the stop signs than there were without them. Half the people stop, half don't. There's going to be an accident someday, Walker predicts. But the signs do have one advantage. They slow at least some of the drivers down so the coffee drinkers at the Tenderfoot can get a good look at who is going by. That was the Tenderfoot in 1990. Okay, let's see. My next story is going to be about Dick Webb here. Mail carrier Dick Webb, I wrote this for the Wenatchee World, June 13th, 1989. Mail carrier Dick Webb is sometimes a bit late coming down the last stretch of his route, but no one seems to mind. The affable Webb is susceptible to his patrons wanting to stop and chat. Besides, Webb has handled Methow Valley mail for the last 32 years in one capacity or another, and his reputation as an efficient, thoughtful mail carrier equals his reputation as a keeper of confidences. Because he knows he may be some people's only contact with the world, Webb never begrudges the time spent talking and listening to those who lie in wait for his familiar red Dodge pickup. He knows too that what is offered as information through the pickup window should not be referred to on Main Street. The terms web and rural mail are practically synonymous in this valley community where Lee Webb, Dick's father, began delivering to country mailboxes in 1927. As a youngster, Dick often went along for the ride. 6 days a week, Webb, whose big frame fills his small cab, weaves a crazy pattern of 86 miles from Balky Hill to Elbow Coulee, maneuvering gracefully from mailbox to mailbox, making as many as 300 stops. After 10 years, his odometer is pushing 300,000 miles, although he never strays farther than 16 air miles from Twisp. His father used to say that when people moved to the country, the proudest thing a man could do was to put a mailbox up with his name on it. Dick no longer feels this is true. Nowadays, up to 5 families will share a mailbox, he said. When one of them moves or divorces or changes names, I have to figure out how to get their mail to them. Mail just doesn't seem to have the supreme importance that it once had. While admitting that his job is in some ways repetitious and confining, Webb sees his mail route as if it were an unfinished manuscript. You deal with change every day, he said. If someone comes into the valley, sets up his tent beside a campfire, and sticks a mailbox in front of it, we have to deliver the mail to him. I also have to make a lot of educated guesses when letters are addressed to Uncle Terry and Aunt Karen, because I have two couples on my route by those names, two Donald A. Johnsons also, he laughed. One day, Webb was the first along the Twist River Road to find Millie Walker lying in the road. She had fallen on the ice and broken her hip. Thinking fast, Webb got help and lifted her onto the handiest pallet, an outhouse door. Ambulance attendants put her, outhouse door and all, into their vehicle for the ride to the hospital in Wenatchee. Webb is credited with saving her life. Taking to heart the Postal Department's slogan, which proclaims that neither hail nor snow, et cetera, will interfere with mail delivery, Webb recalled that he has never not delivered the mail, except the one time he was down with the flu. The winter, it hit 50 below zero, and his vehicle windows had frozen in the down position. His father, equally stalwart, was stymied only once for 3 days in 1948 after the flood wiped out every single bridge along the Methow River. For several weeks, his father had to find routes over forgotten ridges to get to his patrons, and carried 2 heavy planks in his rig to throw across the numerous gullies. A native of Twist who has never lived anywhere else, Webb is also a photographer of the valley. His hand-tinted photographs of the Methow at the turn of the century are hanging today at Twist's Confluence Gallery for the next 6 weeks. Webb's customers along his rural route look forward to his daily visits. They know they can depend on him.
Great.
Yeah, Bill and I went to Dick's funeral a couple of years ago, right down by the confluence of the Twist River and the Methow River. They had it outside because that's where the Webbs lived. There are many, many Webbs in the valley. And it was their homestead house that got wiped out in 1948. And there's a big gazebo, well, it's a huge roof over picnic tables down there now. And that's where his memorial was held. It was very moving. It was very.
That's a nice photo of him too.
Yeah, it's a neat 1989.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
This story is about tribal matriarch Christine Williams, and I wrote it for the Wenatchee World, January 11th, 1993. Christine Williams doesn't take up much space on her granddaughter's sofa, but the diminutive woman has been going strong for more than 9 decades and commands the respect of over 100 grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Whoa.
I got so many, I don't know how many, she said of her offspring. It must be hundreds. She laughed with the sheer wonder of it. Oh, I like them all. Mrs. Williams, née Christine Pierre, is the Colville Confederated Tribe's 3rd oldest member. She grew up near Ellisford and in a valley northeast of Tonasket, riding horseback to school near the legendary Hee Stone and going 1 year to St. Mary's Indian Mission. On her blue tribal enrollment card, 1897 has been set down as the year of her birth. It's as close as anyone can accurately guess, given certain circumstances in her life. Before the infiltration of French traders and Jesuit missionaries, area Native Americans saw little necessity in keeping records. a decidedly Anglo-Saxon value. Williams speaks Okanagan, preferring it over English. She smooths out the harsh consonants of English, making sh out of s's and sh being a sound prevalent in her own tongue. She plays tricks with personal pronouns. That old guy, she, etc., and laughs sweetly when something strikes her as amazing. For a long, long time, she would never, ever talk to anybody outside the family unless she had an interpreter, explained her granddaughter, Cindy Axon. Mrs. Williams' memories stretch so far back, they include seemingly endless crowds of relatives, grandparents, uncles, cousins, who lived and worked together as they reaped the rich natural resources of the upper Okanagan Valley and harvested hay from the fecund meadows. When I was a child, me and my grandma'd pick huckleberries, while my dad and mom pitched hay. We'd go way up here, she reminisced, pointing out the window to hills beyond the housing development. Outside, fresh, deep snows cover moccasin flats across from the precision pine sawmill north of Omak. Gee, my grandma, she had big baskets, 10, 15-gallon baskets hooked on the saddles. When we get back, my mother, she can it all. When work was done, men of the family fished the river for salmon. I'd go on the hack and meet them over there. I'd make coffee for them. Gee, she, meaning they, would get a bunch. They'd have to cut it up and dry it. And I'd do the cleaning. Oh, I got hard times. Here she laughed her bell-like laughter, her head back. Oh, I got hard times is a refrain of hers, not meant to elicit sympathy, but to point out the main fact of her life. Childbirths at home, 2 babies dying, raising 11 children, planting an orchard. Those hard times too involve a string of horror stories that contain a lot of personal, complicated history, like the time she was deliberately poisoned by a bitterroot potion, jealousy, the supposed motive, bitten by a black widow spider, when she lost an eye to cancer, and when 2 of her houses were burnt to the ground, again deliberately. Gee, they don't like me. I don't know why, she said of the arson. I never do nothing. I never said nothing. Granddaughter Axon related that after her grandmother's father died, she inherited several allotments of land. The poisoning and the house burnings were a probable result of this wealth, she figured. Mrs. Williams has long been known as a master beater. For years, that's all she did, Axon said. Bags, moccasins, gloves. Even now, if you go to the Indian dances, many of the people are wearing her moccasins. Them small beads too, Williams pointed out. After I lost my eye, I'm just the same. I work, I make moccasin, I make anything. I got big family. I have to clothe my kids, all my girls, even my granddaughter knew how to bead now. I tan hide, I scrape hide. Sometimes when it's big hide, it's hard scraping. My dad scrapes it. Mrs. Williams still takes sweat baths during clement weather. The ritual sweats are a going to church thing, during which participants sing and afterward are protected from evil spirits. Axon said that once in a while her grandmother will tell her to sweat. Indians are taught to respect their elders, Axon said. My grandma will tell me, you have to do this for so many days, and that's what I do. And sometimes she won't give a reason. All her grandchildren come to her for advice. In our family, she's the boss. Christine Williams sat placidly on the sofa, happy in the swirl of family. She joked, "Short time, I'm getting old. I might die anytime." She laughed again, laughed at life, laughed as if life, though deadly serious, had as good a sense of humor as she.
Wow. How old did you say she was?
Well,
Over
they
90.
put her date down as 1897, and this was in 93, so she was 90. You figured it. Bill just brought me in a beaded moccasin. This is not one that she made, but
Beautiful.
if any of you remember back in the old days when Matt Olison used to play music with us, played banjo, and he was a real mountain man, and he beaded those moccasins for me. It's my most favorite treasure.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. Now this next story, I went yesterday up to Winthrop to take a picture of, to illustrate what I'm going to talk about here. This is called Wonder Woman Builds Home in Winthrop. And I wrote it for the Wenatchee World, October 30th, 1991. This is about Ruby Hagermeister, 59. She'd rather build Victorian houses than knit. And she'll do it single-handedly. When it comes to doing something like this, she said, waving her hand at the 3-story turreted house with the gingerbread eaves behind her, "Well, fine, but put a pair of knitting needles in my hands and I'm a klutz." What other woman would glow when relating that her children had given her and her husband Frank sheetrock for their 40th wedding anniversary? Who but Ruby Hagermeister of Winthrop would rather wear a tulle apron than a kitchen apron? Known as Wonder Woman by neighbors who have watched her extraordinary determination for the past 6 years, Ruby would deny that she's strictly a one-woman show. "Frank keeps my saw sharp," she explained. "Oh, and he holds a board now and then when I can corner him." Admittedly, Frank would rather tend the animals and 15 acres of fields on Bear Creek, which they've owned for 10 years. If pressed, he'll carry stone for her, but she's the one who does the actual masonry. Since she loathes the lathe, Frank took it on himself to take bowling pins, strip off the plastic, and shape them to fit the decorative railings that line the widow's walks on the roof line. I don't know if you can see those anymore. At first, he wasn't all that pleased that his wife was, face it, building a Victorian style house. "We used to go hunting and fishing," he griped with a smile. "Now all she does is this." This is a 2,500 square foot home that she's created after purchasing a very poor set of plans for $35. They served as a sketchy map she's strayed from continually. She's read nothing but do-it-yourself books in the last 6 years and spent countless, oh great, countless, countless. I'll get to it. Countless sleepless nights cogitating on how to tie together the 9 different angles of the window eyebrows, how to truss the attic roof, and how to get the wiring just right. While other women wondered what to cook for dinner, Ruby grappled with how to frame the multiple roof angles and how to route the plumbing pipes from the second floor to the first. to tack the asphalt shingles to the turret, she devised a ladder that could be lassoed to the center post. High off the ground, she'd hang onto the ladder and jog herself around. The fact that the undertaking seems endless does not faze her. We have no deadline to get this finished, she said. We just build as we can afford it. Much of the framing and 38 window headers are made of used lumber scrapped by now defunct sawmill. One light fixture is from her mother's house, a cabinet from her great-grandmother's. She bought the oak flooring at a garage sale for a song, along with a carpet she's saved for years. All the doors are used. By refinishing, cutting, and pasting, teaching herself how to make stained glass and how to fashion her own gingerbread, Ruby spiffs up secondhand things to complement the naturally elegant lines of the house. And she never throws away a piece of wood. She never knows when it might come in handy. 35 years ago, she and her husband built their first house in California, a straight rectangular house that, compared to this project, was like building a shed. I don't know if this is authentic or not, she said of her Victorian-looking home, which has been rising majestically from the once barren hillsides for the last 6 years. Probably not, she shrugged, suggesting this does not seem of paramount importance to her. What's important is that she's just about pulled it off. It's been exciting, she confessed. I turned around and took a picture. So I took a picture of the house yesterday from the road, and this is what I saw when I turned around. For those of you who are missing the snow on the mountains, there it is. I'm going to read a story about, I got this all mixed up. Our neighbor up the Twist River for years was Perry Brewster. He was a rancher. I don't have a picture of him. And it ran in the Wenatchee World, June 14th, 1989. With calving over and blossoms not yet bluing his dryland alfalfa, Perry Brewster snatched an hour between routine chores to talk about his life as a cattle rancher. As far as the Methow being great cattle country, well, it isn't, said Brewster, a serious rancher whose family has been in the business on the same land since 1937. Brewster conceded that the cattle game has always been risky, but weather has been so uncooperative in the last few years that few good pastures are left on rangeland in the Okanagan National Forest. Still, this is the second year that beef prices are up, he noted. First time I can remember 2 good years in a row, he grinned. 10 years before that, they stayed low. That was one long dry spell. No scientific studies have been conducted to determine why diehards like Brewster stick with it, given the built-in detriments of fickle weather, fickle cows calving in mud at midnight, and strings of low-paying years when 4-legged assets turn into 2-horned deficits. About the only good thing about being a rancher, he said, is that they can do as they darn well please. They can do as they darn well please. That is ranchers. Cows too, probably. He listed the dozen or so remaining cattlemen in the Methow Valley, and it sounded like a who's who of sons and grandsons of the first pioneers. Those progeny were enduring types who, as Brewster diagnosed, survived long enough to have ranching life rub off on them. I don't see a lot of young people going into the business today unless they were born with a silver spoon in their mouths, Brewster judged. I bought this place for my parents in 1945. A definite advantage right there, he said. Today, they'd have to sink $500,000 into it and borrow that from the bank, which would own it in about 10 years. He laughed. Ranching's a pretty expensive habit. Just ask my wife. Let's say someone bought a new tractor today, he went on. It would cost more than all my machinery put together. I bought an old tractor for parts cheaper than if I bought just one new part. In this business, you've got to stick to it all the time, he said, day in and day out. If you can't take care of your cattle, you better not have them. It's the sort of life that either grows on you or it doesn't. It's not simple, this life. You've got to be adept at not only handling animals and seed and long hours and know nearly as much as a veterinarian and more than a mechanic. You must know how to cure hemorrhoids in a cow and to fix a swather, how to steal from one engine to fit another, how to jimmy a fence, coax a reluctant field to produce, when to pray for rain and when to pray to have it stop. Brewster, whose land, both owned and leased, spreads over several south-facing hillsides above the Twist River. He's a one-man show who gets periodic help from sons or neighbors. He puts up 80 acres of hay, most of it from dryland fields. He rides 10 miles of fence line, either on his horse or in an ancient vehicle which has never known pavement. He keeps tabs on his herd through every demanding season in this mountainous region. He keeps on excellent terms with his saddle horse, his cow dog, and his jackknife. All the years he's ranched, he worked extra to support his cattle habit at the sawmill during winters, or driving trucks in Seattle, or riding the range for other area cattlemen. Now that he draws Social Security, he has time to draw his breath. But he shows little sign of wanting to cash in his herd. In fact, he gets close to sentimental when he describes, say, working on a machine and looking up to find 6 calves surrounding him, watching. They're a spoiled bunch, he shrugs. He walks past the house, up past the barn, past the herd, and under some highly charged barbed wire into a strong stand of dryland alfalfa. Anyone can see the man derives life from the place and it from him. It's late May and the alfalfa comes up to the eyeballs of Brewster's cow dog, Digger. Digger coughs. Brewster looks at him and says, "Guess him and me, we better retire." He sticks his hands into his pockets and looks over at the still snowy mountains. He doesn't mean a word of it.
Really good.
Perry Brewster. Oh, yeah. What time is it?
Plenty of time.
I wrote this story for the Methow Valley News, August 16th, 1984. I just think it's interesting what people do with their lives. Okay. Even though most students of the Twisp High School class of 1965 won't remember it, their class motto stated, "I am part of all that I have met." Next year marked 20 years since those graduates stepped out of the high school and headed out to meet their futures. The directions they headed are as varied as the individuals. They're missionaries, musicians, educators, businessmen, and businesswomen. 2 of those classmates, together for all 12 of their school years, chose to live in vastly different ways. One, John Helam, followed his travel bent around the world and for the last 4 years has made his home on the Arabian Peninsula in the Islamic culture of Yemen. The other, Clyde Dicus, opted to live and work in the Methow Valley where he was born and educated. Said Clyde the other day, slightly awed and perplexed, I can't imagine living in Yemen. There's enough to deal with in the metropolis of Twisp. Clyde seldom leaves the valley. I don't see any reason to go. I don't like cities, and besides, you can get everything you want right here. John, on the other hand, trying to explain his choice, said he enjoys challenging himself in different cultures with different people. He speaks, reads, and writes Arabic and is well versed in the Arabic way of life. He does admit that although I love the Arabic culture, I'm still a Westerner there, no matter how hard I try to fit in. When the class of 1965 headed out, the Vietnam War was on the horizon. Clyde and John both complied with Uncle Sam, but neither was thrown into the conflict. John spent 2 years in Crete in administration, and Clyde spent 16 months in Heidelberg, Germany. Both characterized their military stints as deluxe or vacation. Today, John teaches geography in the international school in Aiz, Yemen, the country's second largest city of about 175 people. Though it lacks trees, the area has a beauty not unlike the Methow valleys, according to John. At night, he goes to sleep to the sound of Voice of America on the radio, then rises in the morning to teach in the school of around 1,000 mostly Yemeni students between kindergarten and 12th grade. His colleagues are American, English, Indian, Syrian, Egyptian, and Yemeni. I like teaching there, he said. The students really want the education. John credits his biology teacher in Twisp, Mr. Brantner, as convincing him to be a teacher. After earning his teaching degree, he went to teach in a high school in Maine, as far away as I could get from Twisp, he said. The more I got away from the valley, the more I liked it. After 4 years in the army, he backpacked around Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. His appetite for foreign cultures was whetted, but he returned to the valley for a job with the Forest Service on the Spruce Budworm Project until he applied for and received the teaching position in Yemen. On a side street in Twisp, Clyde and his wife, Nancy, turned his father's horse pasture into a lovely manicured home site. The vegetable garden is prolific. Their 2 children play on a broad expanse of lawn. The house is his own handiwork, and his job with the telephone utilities of Washington, serving lines from Carlton to Lost River, is secure. Pondering the inescapable fact that he and his classmates are creeping up on 40, Clyde observed, "Kids keep you going. You don't have a chance to think about it much. Those 20 years sure went by fast. I don't really feel any different. I just have a little more sense." A pause, I hope. He added, as someone once said, "You're not getting older, you're just not young anymore." John and Clyde may have gone to the same classes together for 12 years, had the same teachers, the same valley to grow up in, but those 20 years since unfolded wildly differently for the 2 men. They each gave themselves to vastly different communities and became part of all they've met.
Wonderful. Great.
Okay.
Just keep going.
One last piece that I wrote for the Wenatchee World on June 24th, 1992, called Ranch Rhyme. And the date line is Smyrna Valley, not the Methow Valley, but I thought this was fun anyway. Bud Stewart is the genuine article, a cowboy poet who's still a working cowboy. Lean as beef jerky, Stewart comes to life the second he launches into one of his poems. His eyes dance and he grins and nods and pokes the air with his finger as he rhapsodizes about how curious life is in the saddle and off it. "Now let me tell you a story," he started, "about old cowboys and what brings them down. Some go down the neck of a bottle soon as they've moved into town. Others' lives are ruined by women. They get real bitter and then they wind up hating everything, just as cranky as an old setting hen. No matter if he's on the stage in front of a crowd of cattlemen or leaning back in his easy chair, which he was right then, Stewart's delivery is animated and so conversational that listener just nods and murmurs, go on. The 66-year-old rancher and his wife Shirley have run a herd of Charolais Angus for the last 40 years in the Smyrna Valley, a sequestered and fertile ribbon of land in southern Grant County, bordered by the Saddle Mountains and an escarpment of the Royal Slope along Lower Crab Creek. 2 ranching sons live nearby. There's a clan of us here, Stewart said. You can tell by the names on the mailboxes. From the windows of their house, they look out on fields and pasture flowing to the far horizon, surprisingly green these dry days. Stewart has been a rancher from the word go, but he only turned poet 6 years ago. He and his wife had gone to the renowned cowboy poetry gathering in Elko, Nevada in 1986, about the furthest I'd ever been from home in my life, he said. When an official just happened to mention to them that his Washington state poets hadn't shown up, without missing a beat, Shirley told the man her husband would stand in. Never having written a poem, Stewart was nonetheless buoyed by his wife's enthusiasm and took to the stage with surprising ease and recited a song parody he'd heard his father repeat. Stewart was hooked. Driving back home from Elko, his first poem was lined out before they even hit the Royal Slope. Since that fortuitous delivery in Elko, Stewart has written a book full of poems and memorized dozens of his favorites. He performs all over the Northwest, a dozen or more times a year. He's regaled audiences at county cattlemen banquets, county fairs, weddings, and benefits, at Seattle's Folklight Festival and Spokane's Pine Song. He's been on programs with the big names in cowboy poetry, Wallace McCrae and Waddy Mitchell and Baxter Black. He believes in humor, in message, in rhyme. I find that if you can announce that this actually happened, you get their attention better, he said. He wrote one about the time he butchered a neighbor's steer, usually something a rancher might think twice about letting the rest of the world know. He recited, "Now Earl and Irene are friends of mine, have been for many a year, but I nearly fractured our friendship the time I butchered his steer." 10 verses later, he clears up the whole mess. A gentleman, like so many cowboys of the old school, Stewart will often mouth the offending words, not say them out loudly if there are children present, but offensive to him never gets much beyond the hell stage. This one is about as risque as it gets. It's called The First Time. Now I remember the first time I tried it. I was just a boy of 16. Though she was younger than I, more composed and sure she seemed. It was down at the barn, I remember, at the close of a lush summer day, and the evening was scented with clover and the fragrance of newly mown hay. And I was eager, but awkwardly backward, uncertain as how to proceed, but she didn't mind the hesitance in which I'd prepared for the deed. And it was long, long after I'd stood up, uncertain to stay or to run, with a tingle of pride, yet shaking a bit, I knew that at last it was done. Now I remember that victorious feeling, my heart hammered close to my blouse. With the joy of a boy turned into a man, I made my way back to the house. Now it's been 40 long years since that evening. I've never forgotten that vow, nor the pride and the joy that I felt as a boy on the night that I first milked a cow. Poetry is a good hobby, he said with a grin. It gives It gives me a good reason to get away from the damned ranch. He's just joshing. He likes the damned ranch. Besides, it's full of poems just waiting to be written. That's all I have for you today.
Yay, thank you. Lovely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so great.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much,
That was
Diane.
awesome.
Thanks. Yeah. Fun story, sort of the way I feel about the Methow is just a place ready for stories. Actually, yeah.
Have so many of them ranging over such a large range of subjects. It's wonderful. I
Yeah,
love his sense of humor.
Yes.
Your writing style is just so fun to listen to.
yeah, thank you.
We need to find somebody that wants to record the stories of today.
Yeah, but they're so different.
Yeah, but in the future, these will be different than the ones in the future. So,
Well, I understand that. Yeah, I'm certainly getting more fun out of these stories today than I would have 20 years ago, let's say, you know? I mean, it's why all these stories that aren't in the book, I picked up, 20 years later, because they're interesting now. I mean, the time going on has shifted perspective. So it becomes really contrasted. All the stories that from then are so different from now because we've changed so much. Yeah.
right. Well, we're looking for somebody to capture all our members' stories. So if you know anybody that just loves to write and has a great sense of humor, I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody here want to do it?
Thanks so much, Diane.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's nice to see
Wonderful.
you. It's nice to see you all.
Yeah, and I've been here too, Diane. I want to thank Bill because he was our audience with the appropriate laughs and
Oh,
little,
yeah.
Yes.
recognition, because all of us were muted, but Bill, and it was just great to hear him chuckle. And at one point you said, wonderful. It was just great to hear you.
And it's okay
No,
for
that's
everybody to
fine.
unmute themselves for a second to do that. That's fine.
To laugh.
Yeah, thank you, Matt
Yeah.
and Frauke.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, glad you made it on.
Yes. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you,
It's been
Deirdre.
it's
Nice to see you, Mary Ellen. Hello, didn't
Mhm.
see you. You came on a little late.
Mhm.
Mike and Liz, you can go eat now.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Lunch
Thank you,
time.
Diana.
Thanks, Diane.
all right.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you,
You're
Diane.
welcome.
All right.
It's nice to
Bye.
see you all. Bye-bye.